everyone. Welcome to this year's International Disability Rights Affirmation Conference, IDRAC. These annual conferences are sponsored by Virtual Ability. You may notice VAI greeters at the back of the auditorium standing at the top of the aisles. If you need assistance during the conference, please, I am one of them. If you are not familiar with Virtual Ability in Second Life, please check the poster on stage to receive a note card. You can also view the community's website at http://virtualability.org. To find out more about the IDRAC conference, please look here, http://blog.virtualability.org. We invite you to comment on the presentations there. The title of this session is Inclusive Emergency Preparedness, or I'll Open My Own Doors. Surviving a disaster can be only the beginning of an ongoing struggle for people with disabilities. In this presentation, you will gain practical information that people with and without disabilities can use to prepare for emergencies. The information is also pertinent to family members and care providers of persons with disabilities. Our presenter is Mike Rose, Emergency Preparedness Specialist for the Public Health Division of the New Mexico Department of Health. His responsibilities include region-wide response planning to communicable disease outbreaks, developing and maintaining comprehensive regional plans to support receipt of strategic national stockpile materials, and distribution of countermeasures following incidents of bioterrorism. As a citizen volunteer, Mr. Rose is the current program manager for the Albuquerque, New Mexico Community Emergency Response Team, CERT, program. He has begun providing emergency preparedness training for persons with disabilities within the virtual world setting. Thank you for sharing this information with us today, Mr. Rose. It's all yours.
Thank you, Orange. I appreciate that wonderful introduction. Good day, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for attending today's presentation. As Orange said, my name is Cert Mistwalker. My real-life avatar is Mike Rose. In Second Life, I'm an independent consultant and emergency management practitioner with over 30 years real-life experience in health, safety, and emergency management. Additionally, I sit on the board of directors Zone and Confederated Response Force in Second Life. I want to take this moment to thank the Virtual Ability Organization and the conference organizers for the opportunity to bring emergency preparedness topics to this audience through the third annual International Disability Rights Affirmation Conference. So let's switch gears just a little bit. While keeping in context of the theme, we want to talk some emergency preparedness. So let's set the stage here. Damage caused by natural disasters and man-made events can be extensive. For the 10% of the world's population living with disabilities, surviving a disaster can be the beginning of a greater struggle. Although humans can do little or nothing to change the incidence or intensity of most natural phenomena, we all have an important role to play in ensuring that natural events are not converted into disasters by our own actions. Disasters can have massive human and economic costs. They may cause many deaths, severe injuries, and food shortages. Most incidents of severe injuries and deaths occur during the time of impact, whereas disease outbreaks and food shortages often arise much later, depending on the nature and the duration of the disaster. Anticipating the potential consequences of disasters can help determine the actions that need to be started before the disaster strikes to minimize its effects. While emergency services personnel are the best trained and equipped to handle emergencies, they may not be immediately available in a catastrophic disaster. In such a situation, members of the community may be on their own for several days, weeks, or even longer. You may have to rely on your own resources for food, water, first aid, and shelter. Neighbors or co-workers may have to provide immediate assistance to those who are hurt or need other help. Whether an individual with a disability requires electricity to power a respirator, life-sustaining medication, mobility assistance, or post-disaster recovery services, relief organizations and rescue personnel increasingly must be prepared to address the needs of that individual in the hours and days following a disaster. In addition, to maintain the dignity and independence that lies at the heart of the disability movement, people with disabilities must take personal responsibility for their safety to the degree allowed by their disability. Let's talk some barriers that we have seen to access. Different populations face similar risks to exposure to the negative effects of environmental and man-made disasters. Their actual vulnerability is dependent on their socioeconomic conditions, civic and social empowerment, and access to mitigation and relief resources. Individuals with disabilities are disproportionately affected in disasters, emergency, and conflict situations due to inaccessible evacuation, response, and recovery efforts. People with disabilities frequently encounter barriers to physical plants, communications, and programs in shelters and recovery centers, as well as other facilities or devices used in connection with disaster operations, such as first aid stations, mass feeding areas, portable payphone stations, portable toilets, and temporary shelters. Many of these barriers are not new. Information and lessons learned are not shared across agency lines, and thus historical experiences, do not enlighten the development of new practices. Many accessibility lessons learned during previous disasters have not been incorporated in subsequent planning, preparedness, response, and recovery activities. Segments of the disability community reported problems in helping to develop and benefiting from services over many decades. People with disabilities and activity limitations are left out of preparedness and planning activities. These activities include analyzing and documenting the possibility of an emergency or disaster and the potential consequences or impacts on life, property, and the environment. Disaster preparedness and emergency response systems are traditionally designed for people without disabilities, for whom escape or rescue involves walking, running, driving, seeing, hearing, or quickly responding to instructions, alerts, and evacuation announcements. The needs of persons with disabilities are excluded over the more long-term recovery and reconstruction efforts, thus missing another opportunity to ensure that cities are accessible and inclusively resilient to future disasters. How are we going to open doors? Open doors through inclusiveness. Post-disaster lessons learned show us that including the needs of persons with disasters at all stages of the disaster management process, and especially during planning and preparedness, can significantly reduce their vulnerability. It will increase the effectiveness of government response and recovery efforts. Rehabilitation and reconstruction efforts must be inclusive and responsive to the needs of all people. This includes participation from persons with disabilities to ensure that their needs and rights are respected. Emergency planners should learn and gain from the knowledge, experiences, and non-traditional resources the disability community can bring to a partnership effort with emergency professionals, including working with institutional and industry-specific groups that are not typically considered emergency services resources, but that can offer valuable and timely support to emergency professionals. Identifying and marshaling these groups ahead of time leads to a better prepared service community that is able to take on responsibilities during an emergency. Jurisdictions should work to educate citizens with disabilities about realistic expectations of service during and after an emergency. Such education results in a more cooperative relationship with local authorities and enhances appreciation of the concerns of people with disabilities. It also leads to improved response by the entire community. It is important to realize that people with disabilities, even more than other demographic segments of the population, are not a homogeneous group. Individuals with disabilities have differing capabilities, opinions, needs, and circumstances, and no one individual or organization speaks for all people with disabilities. The disability group, we need to remember, is one that people can join at any time. So how do we prepare for disaster? How do you prepare for disaster? Many preparedness actions are useful in any type of an emergency, and some are very specific to the particular type of disaster. A critical first step to preparedness is to understand the hazards in your community and to learn about the local alerts and warning systems, the evacuation routes, the shelter. It is also important that citizens familiarize themselves with hazards in other areas when they are traveling, as they may experience a type of hazard to which they may not be familiar. Regardless of the type of disaster, important elements of disaster preparedness include having the skills to evaluate the situation quickly, the ability to take effective action to protect yourself, having a family disaster plan and practicing the plan with drills, assembling supplies in multiple locations, reducing the impacts of hazards through mitigation practices, getting involved by participating in training and volunteer programs. It is also always important to address specific needs for yourself and for people you know, including any access or functional needs, considerations for pets and service animals, and transportation. Additional preparedness resources can be found at these following websites: ready.gov, www.ready.gov. This is FEMA's national website for disaster preparedness. It provides excellent general advice and is a good place to start. FEMA, www.fema.gov. Are you ready? The Are You Ready site. The Are You Ready manual is a 200-page FEMA publication that provides a step-by-step approach to disaster preparedness and specific information by disaster type. The American Red Cross, and there are other Red Cross type organizations in other parts of the world, Red Crescent for instance. This site, www.redcross.org, has a website full of excellent tips and information related to most natural disasters that occur, including a few topics that are not covered in FEMA's site. The CDC, www.pandemicflu.gov. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention established this website as a hub for national information on pandemic influenza. Let's talk a little bit about understanding your local hazards. Assessing a community's vulnerability to hazards allows the community to prioritize preparedness measures and to target effective actions for the appropriate hazard. To assess your community's vulnerability to hazards, it's useful to identify the most common disaster. What happens in your area? What happens in your community? Identify possible hazards with the most severe impact. Could it be floods? Could it be tornado? Could it be earthquake? Consider recent and or historical impacts. What's happened in the past in your area? Identify susceptible locations in your community for specific hazards. The peoples, the buildings, the infrastructures. What's most likely to take damage in the event of a disaster? Consider what to expect for disruption of services and length of restoration. If the infrastructure in your community is damaged or destroyed, what is that impact to you? What is the impact to the length of restoration it may take? Let's talk a few protective actions. Because disasters occur with little or no warning, individuals need to have the knowledge and skills to take immediate protective actions in the event of a disaster occurring. While the specific action to take is based on the disaster type, the amount of warning, whether one is inside, outside, or driving, practicing situational awareness will provide the basis of information to make efficient and effective decisions. Situational awareness is the perception of environmental elements with respect to time and or space, the comprehension of their meaning, and the projection of their status after some variable has changed, such as time or a predetermined event. Situational awareness involves being aware of what is happening in your vicinity in order to understand how information, events, and one's own actions will impact goals and the objectives, both immediately and in the near future. Now that's quite a mouthful. Basically, situational awareness is knowing what's going on around you. How does it affect you? And what actions do you need to take to protect yourself? The process. The process is dynamic. It's continual. It's a continual process of information gathering, analysis, actions, and evaluations. Gather facts. What's going on around you? Assess that information. Is it immediately dangerous to you? Consider the probabilities, the what ifs. What if the situation continues? What if a storm returns? What if you need additional considerations? Assess your situation. Priorities. Do you need food, shelter, water, medication? Establish those priorities for you. And make a decision. Don't be afraid to make a decision based upon your priorities. And develop a plan of action. What do you need to do to take care of yourself and your family? And then take that action. Do what needs to be done to take care of yourself and your family. And then evaluate that progress. Have you met your goals? Did you meet your action plan? And repeat that process. It's a continual process. In addition to knowing the immediate protective actions that you need to take, making an emergency plan can mean the difference between life and death in a disaster. For example, make a plan with your personal care attendant. If you use an attendant from an agency, see if the agency has special provisions for emergencies. If the attendant is not from an agency, make your own emergency plan. Develop a buddy system with your family, your friends, neighbors, or other coworkers, and plan how each will help the other in an emergency. Where will you meet family members? You should have a location outside the house and another location outside the neighborhood. Identify an out-of-state check-in contact, somebody that is out of your state that you can call, that your family can call and check in with. Plan for all possibilities, an extended stay in a shelter in place in your home, or an evacuation. Determine at least 2 usable exits from each room in your home or workplace and your building. Make it a habit to do this wherever you are, whether you're out shopping, at the movies, or visiting friends. What route and several alternative routes will you use to evacuate if you need to? And do you have transportation? Your family's safety is always the most important factor when a disaster strikes. In an effort to make the best decision regarding family safety, always first consider what is best given the situation that you're in. It is also essential that you practice this plan with your family. Evacuating the home, contacting all family members, using that out-of-state contact, practicing your plan now will improve your performance when it matters most. Now, everyone's answers to these questions may be a little bit different depending on the hazards, and you will probably not be able to plan for every conceivable event. But by playing the what-ifs with the hazards you've identified in your community, you will be better prepared for any hazard that might strike. How many of you have developed a disaster plan for your home or workplace? Have you taken these things into consideration? It's vitally important that your escape plan includes escape from every room of your home or every area of your workplace. Your plan must consider all family members. Your plan must consider the circumstances of your disability. All family members and your neighbors and coworkers should be informed about the plan. For those who rely on assistive devices such as hearing aids, wheelchairs, crutches, respirators, eyeglasses, keep important equipment and these assistive devices in a consistent, convenient, and secured location so you can quickly and easily locate them after a disaster. Include in your emergency kit extra hearing aids, batteries, eyeglasses. Those types of things can be replaced if lost or damaged. Store additional mobility aids such as canes, crutches, walkers, wheelchairs as a backup to your primary equipment. Write down the instructions needed to secure your house and to provide for your personal safety. It may be difficult to remember these things due to shock and confusion following a disaster. Keep a copy with you. Post a copy in a highly visible place in your home, such as on the refrigerator, and share this information with your personal support network. Let's talk about disaster supplies. What do you need to have in order to evacuate or shelter in place? You can best cope by preparing for disaster before it strikes. One way to prepare is by assembling a disaster supply kit. After disaster strikes, you won't have time to shop or search for these supplies. But if you've gathered these supplies in advance, you and your family can endure an evacuation or home confinement. So what is a 72-hour kit or a disaster supply kit? A 72-hour kit is the most basic minimum survival kit you should have. It is the type of kit recommended by FEMA and by the Red Cross. It is designed to help you get through the first 72 hours of a disaster, 72 hours or 3 days. It usually consists of food, water, warmth and shelter items, extra clothes, first aid supplies, personal items. Don't forget things such as cash. If there's no power in your community and you can't access an ATM or some other way of getting money, you need cash in your pocket to buy supplies or gasoline. And don't forget your pets. Don't forget your service animals. To prepare your kit, remember that many households already may have many of these items available for their kits. These items can be assembled in appropriate locations for quick access in emergency, but used under normal circumstances when needed. For example, keep a wrench in your kit to shut off gas at a meter in an emergency, but use that wrench for everyday tasks also. Just be sure to return it to your emergency kit. Place the supplies you're apt to need for an evacuation in an easy-to-carry container. And additional resources can be found at the American Red Cross website, www.redcross.org, or the ready.gov site, http://www.ready.gov. Here's something also to consider: personal protective equipment. Your first priority as a citizen is to look after your own safety. With that in mind, you should assemble an emergency kit containing protective equipment. Items might include a safety helmet, goggles, some type of safety glasses, an N95 respirator or mask because they provide better protection than just an ordinary dust mask. Gloves, both leather work gloves and some type of an examination glove. Good quality, sturdy footwear, boots with protection for soles and ankles if your disability so allows. Garbage bags, hand tools, blankets, duct tape, plastic sheeting, a change of clothes, some bedding. Place these supplies as well, the ones that you're apt to need for an evacuation, in an easy-to-carry container. Now, we talked a little bit about reducing the impacts of hazards through mitigation. Let's talk a little bit about that mitigation process and what it looks like. In addition to managing the impact of a disaster would have by assembling disaster supplies, mitigation will also help. Mitigation is the reduction of loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disasters. Mitigation includes any activities that prevent an emergency, reduces the likelihood of occurrence, or reduces the damaging effects of these unavoidable hazards. Mitigation can include non-structural measures, structural changes, and purchasing even appropriate insurance. They can be personal mitigation measures, and they can be structural mitigation measures. Everyone should ensure that their homeowner's policy, if you have one, provides adequate coverage and covers the appropriate hazards that are in your area. We have seen in the past, homeowners insurance does not cover damage caused by flooding. It is important to know whether, number one lives in a flood hazard area, and if you do, make sure that you have purchased flood insurance. Or just duct tape everything. Everyone can visit the National Flood Insurance Program, www.floodsmart.gov, for more information. Non-structural hazard mitigation. What does that mean? Non-structural hazard mitigation includes relatively simple actions one can take to prevent home furnishings and appliances from causing damage or injuries during any event that might cause them to shift. Examples of non-structural mitigation might include anchoring heavy furniture, securing appliances and office equipment, installing hurricane storm shutters, secure cabinet doors with child-proof fasteners, locating and labeling gas, electricity, and water shutoffs, secure water heaters, and have flexible gas lines installed on your gas appliances. Pay particular attention to the precautions that are common and necessary in your locality. Now, the community as a whole has a responsibility to prepare. Community preparedness is a key priority in lessening the impact of disasters. It is critical that all community members take steps to prepare in advance of an event. Effective community preparedness addresses the unique attributes of the community, the threat and hazards profile and vulnerabilities of the particular area, the existing infrastructure in that community, resources and skills available within the community, and the population composition of that community. Effective community preparedness also engages the entire community, the government leaders and private sector, community leaders from the private and civic sectors, and the public. Community leaders. Community leaders from both the private and the civic sector have a responsibility to participate in community preparedness. Their responsibilities could include participating on local collaborative planning councils to provide insights and perspectives reflecting their industry or their constituency. For example, people with disabilities, local schools, communities with language or cultural differences, small business, the economically disadvantaged, communities of faith. Identifying and integrating appropriate resources into government plans, and ensuring that facilities, staff, and customers or populations served are prepared, trained, and practiced in preparedness actions. The government. Several studies show us that including the needs and voices of persons with disabilities at all stages of the disaster management process, and especially during the planning and preparedness stage, can significantly reduce their vulnerability, and it increases the effectiveness of government response and recovery efforts. Despite an increasing worldwide focus on disaster risk reduction as opposed to mere disaster response, most city and related government agencies still fail to adequately plan for or include persons with disabilities in their disaster management activities. This causes severe inequities in access to immediate response, as well as long-term recovery sources for people who have disabilities prior to the disaster, and those who actually acquire a disability as a result of that disaster. Government has the responsibility to develop, test, and refine emergency operations plans, ensure that emergency responders have adequate skills and resources, and provide services to protect and assist its citizens. To meet these challenges, government should involve the community in the planning process, to incorporate community resources in the plans, to provide reliable, actionable information, and to encourage training, practicing, and volunteer programs. Government emergency resources providers include emergency management, law enforcement, fire and rescue, emergency medical services, public health services, public works, and human services departments. The public. The public also has a responsibility for preparedness. We all, and let me emphasize that, we all must accept that we have a responsibility as citizens of our community to take care of ourselves during times of disaster. We should also accept the idea that preparing ourselves and our family now will increase the chances of our survival during a disaster. Working with our neighbors will provide the greatest good for the greatest numbers during a disaster. All members of the community should learn about community alerts and warnings, evacuation routes, and how to get that critical information. Take training in preparedness and first aid and response skills. Practice those skills and practice personal plans through periodic drills in multiple settings. Network and be able to help others in your community. Participate in community feedback opportunities. Report suspicious activity. And most importantly, volunteer in your community if you're able. Engaging the whole community. Something we can do, something the first responders need to do. A whole community is a means by which residents, emergency management practitioners, organizational and community leaders, and government officials can collectively understand and assess the needs of their respective communities. They can then determine, organize, and strengthen their assets, capacities, and interests. Whole community is a philosophical approach in how to conduct the business of emergency management. Benefits include shared understanding of community needs and capabilities, greater empowerment and integration of resources from across the community, stronger social infrastructure, establishment of relationships that facilitate more effective prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery activities, increased individual and collective preparedness, greater resiliency in both the community and national levels. A whole community approach attempts to engage the full capacity of the private and nonprofit sectors. This includes businesses, faith-based and disability organizations, and the general public, in conjunction with the participation of local, tribal, state, territorial, and federal governmental partners. Engaging the whole community. The challenge for those engaged in emergency management is to understand how to work with the diversity of groups and organizations and the policies and practices that emerge from them. This is an ongoing effort to improve the ability of local residents to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from any type of threat or hazard effectively. What has emerged, what we have seen, are three whole community principles. Understand and meet the actual needs of the whole community, the actual needs. Community engagement can lead to a deeper understanding of the unique and diverse needs of a population, including its demographics, values, norms, community structures, networks, and relationships. The more we know about our communities, the better we can understand their real-life safety and sustaining needs, and their motivations to participate in emergency management-related activities prior to an event. Engage and empower all parts of the community. Engaging the whole community and empowering local action will better position stakeholders to plan for and meet the actual needs of a community and strengthen the local capacity to deal with the consequences of all threats and hazards. This requires members of the community to be part of the emergency management team. This team should include diverse community members, social and community service groups, institutions, faith-based and disability groups, academia, professional associations, and the private and nonprofit sectors, while including government agencies who may not traditionally have been directly involved in emergency management. When the community is engaged in an authentic dialogue, it becomes empowered to identify its needs and the existing resources that may be used to address them. Strengthen what works well in communities on a daily basis. A whole community approach to building community resilience requires finding ways to support and strengthen the institutions, assets, and networks that work well in communities and are working now to address issues that are important to community members. Existing structures and relationships that are present in the daily lives of individuals, families, businesses, and organizations before an incident occurs can be leveraged and empowered to act effectively during and after disaster strikes. In addition, we also see 6 strategic themes that have process, which speak to the ways the whole community approach can be effectively employed in a disaster, in emergency management. And as such, it represents pathways for actions to implement these principles. These whole community strategic and themes include understanding community complexity, recognizing community capabilities and needs, fostering relationships with community leaders, build and maintain those partnerships, empowering local action, leveraging and strengthening social infrastructure, networks, and assets. Lastly, I'm going to ask each of you to become involved in your community. Preparedness requires active participation from all of us. Start the process by talking to friends and family about the hazards in your area. What step we all need to take to be able to help each other in a crisis, whether large or small. Ask about emergency planning in your workplace, your schools, your places of worship, or other social settings. Make sure that those in charge of community centers, your building, your schools, have a plan, and that they are connected to the community authorities on emergency management and planning. Take training to acquire the skills needed to help others, and keep those skills current through refresher training and practice. Plan also to participate in skills and exercises with your family and neighbors, whether they be at the workplace, school, places of worship, or community organized events. The more you practice, the better prepared you will be to take effective action when disaster happens. Talk to your friends and families about volunteering as well. Getting involved in your community is the most effective way to help your community and prepare yourself for a disaster. And volunteering to help your community through neighborhood and other activities is a great experience to share with everyone. So, I thank you for your time today. In conclusion, from past experience, it's clear that if included, individuals with special needs can assist emergency managers in developing plans that take into consideration special needs issues within their community. They can identify weaknesses and gaps in plans that require further development. They can help develop solutions and resources within the community that can support the emergency management system. They can articulate emergency needs within their own communities. They can encourage overall greater collaboration, coordination, and communication before, during, and after disasters. They can provide opportunities to build awareness of needs and emergency preparedness issues. Everyone in the community has the ability and the responsibility to prepare for disasters. A whole community approach attempts to engage the full capacity of the private and nonprofit sectors. This includes businesses, faith-based and disability organizations, and the general public. In conjunction with that, the participation of local, tribal, state, territorial, and federal governmental partners is crucial. Government leaders have the responsibility to engage the whole community in the process of community planning and in testing and evaluating those plans. Community leaders have the responsibilities to ensure that their employees and their constituent groups are prepared and to participate in ongoing planning councils. The public has the responsibility to learn about community hazards and plans and to prepare, train, practice, and volunteer. And lastly, personal preparedness should be tailored to the hazards in your community, but they should include learning about the community alerts, warnings, and plans, learning about appropriate protective actions, developing your own household plans and conducting drills to practice those plans, assembling disaster supplies in multiple locations, and encouraging others to prepare and volunteer to help your community. Thank you very much. I'll entertain questions. I think we have a little bit of time, but thank you for your time today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Sister's question, the whole community philosophy is potentially very powerful. Where are we seeing this being successfully implemented in the U.S.? Is it just a vision, or is it actually happening? Can you identify role models that have achieved this? Thank you, sister. That's a wonderful question. The whole community approach actually is a very new concept developed by the Federal Emergency Management Association. We see it just beginning as a result of lessons learned from recent disasters. The government on a federal level has finally realized that listening to communities and empowering those communities provides the resources and the best ability for those communities to help themselves. Any role models? There are a few. In California, we see San Diego just now being able to implement these types of whole community concepts. Internationally, we see in England and in Western Europe, Norway, Germany, the international community, I feel, is actually far and away ahead of the U.S. in some types of disaster preparedness. Unfortunately, the U.S., and realize this is just my opinion, is just now beginning to realize this process. Question. I think I like this whole community concept. It's like teamwork. I suspect there are resources in that box by your feet that will tell me more. Can you give us a little more of the how-to, as in how to get started in our local communities getting involved? when we are not physically present with others? It's a great question. How do you get involved even if you're not present? What's the responsible first step? There are many types of ways to get involved in your community. There are online resources available in your community. Most, and I'll speak from a standpoint of knowing what takes place here in the United States, there are additional similar organizations around the world. But in your community, there are online resources available. Your community's Office of Emergency Services, Office of Emergency Management. Those locations will post emergency plans, the plans that the community has available, ready to implement in the event of a disaster. They provide volunteer opportunities. They provide information on training opportunities. That is a great way to get started first. Getting to know your neighbors, getting involved in your community, your faith-based organizations, your community groups is another great way to get involved. That networking, getting to know your neighbors first so that in the event something happens, you can take care of each other. Wonderful question. Thank you. Great question, Armin. The question is, what is my opinion on building personal shelters? No, actually, it's not over the top. And it depends on the type of shelter you're asking about. In the event that you can't evacuate from your home, the idea of building that shelter in your home and having those supplies available to shelter in place is an excellent resource. Additionally, you can pick up information actually here at the bottom of my feet in the box here about building shelters. They don't have to be major construction efforts within your home. They can be an interior room that you can fortify and have supplies ready to go. But in the event that you can't evacuate from your home, that is certainly a reasonable option. Great question, Armin. Thank you.
And sir, just so you know, when Sister is asking her question, she is actually watching on a big screen with a community group. And so this question is coming to you from that community group.
Excellent. So the question becomes, can we summarize some of the key lessons learned from Katrina and Sandy, specifically related to the inclusion of people with disabilities in disaster preparation and response? That's a wonderful question. We are just now seeing some of those lessons learned come to fruition, sister. Part of that goes back to this whole community approach. We're just now learning to include peoples with disabilities in the emergency management and planning process. So we've seen a steady progression since Katrina, since Hurricane Sandy, that across the country in the U.S., emergency managers and offices of emergency management are beginning to include peoples with disabilities in their planning process. I would urge you to check in your own community and check with your emergency management process to see how far along, number one, they are in the planning process, to see if they've identified vulnerable communities, and volunteer your services. Each of you bring a unique perspective to your community. I would urge you to get involved with your emergency management agency and provide those unique attributes. But I think to conclude the answer on your question, sister, is that the major lessons learned we are seeing now is that historically we had not included people with disabilities in the planning process. And the lesson learned now is that we have to. We absolutely have to. Yes, sister. The question is, do emergency management planning groups who want us, people with disabilities, to volunteer, understand that we may need an ADA accommodation in order to contribute? That's an excellent question, and they do tend to balk at that. They are getting better. It behooves the special needs communities to remind the emergency management community of that. Some emergency management agencies are better at understanding than others. I can't speak for specific communities. In my own community here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we've begun to see a more enlightenment of the emergency management agency in providing those accommodations so that they can have the special needs communities come to the table. Great question. Thank you. This last slide is my contact information, my email address. Would love to hear from each and every one of you. Please, if you have any specific questions that we haven't answered here, or if you'd like additional information or resources, please don't hesitate to contact me. You can also get in touch with me, and I won't put words in Gentle's mouth, but I'm sure if you contact Gentle, she's more than happy to contact me as well and relay information or questions. Thank you all. Thank you all very much. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your conference. It's been very informative to me. If there's no further questions, then I'll step aside for the next presenter. Thank you again very much.